You're listening to the Mid-Career GPS Podcast, episode 123. Have you ever questioned leaving your job? Well, if you're listening to this podcast, you likely have. And I'm not talking about quitting your job. I'm talking about going out in a blaze of glory as you land with a better title, greater responsibilities, leading teams, making a bigger impact, and yes, making more money than you have in your career. One common theme across all of my episodes, especially with my guests, is that everyone has a mid-career moment. Your mid-career moment will define who you are, what you do, and what you will do next. Today's guest is no exception. Today, you'll meet Scott Anthony Barlow, the CEO of Happen to Your Career and host of the Happen to Your Career podcast, the largest career change podcast in the world. As a former HR leader, Scott has interviewed over 2,000 people for jobs and completely rejects how most organizations choose to do work. He's a nerd for self-development, human behavior, and ice hockey, and lives in Washington State with his wife and 3 kids. In this episode, you'll learn about Scott's mid-career moment and how it propelled him to change his work and life. Plus, we'll talk about how to assess fit in your career, discuss the advantages and disadvantages of career transition, and why you must be more specific about your value now than ever. This is the Mid-Career GPS Podcast, and I'm your host, John Nerrell. I help mid-career professionals who feel stuck, undervalued, and underutilized show up to find a job they love or love the job they have using my proven 4-step formula. It's time to start building your mid-career GPS. Let's get started. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the podcast. Before I get to today's conversation, I want to know if you are a part of my email community. Being a member of my email community doesn't cost you anything, but more importantly, you will get weekly information related to your leadership and career transition and invitations to special events such as Q&As and giveaways. To get on my email list, click the show notes or visit johnnerrell.com/free to download your free copy of the 55-minute career transition jumpstart and let me help you find the job you love or love the job you have. Now, finding a job you love is a common bond between Scott and me. When he reached out to be a guest, I quickly appreciated his story and passion for helping people find that job they love and deal with the things that happen to their careers. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Happen to Your Career's Scott Anthony Barlow.
My name's Scott Anthony Barlow. I am the CEO and founder of Happen to Your Career, as well as the host of the Happen to Your Career podcast. That's what I do current day. But long before that, I have made many career changes along the way. And it has been quite a winding last 25 years or so. And currently, what I would say is most fun in my world is we get to serve people, helping them identify what creates an extraordinary career for them, an extraordinary next step, and helping them make that happen in their own lives.
Fantastic. So, Scott, everybody's got a story, but where I love bringing my listeners back to is when they were younger, what did you want to be growing up?
I really wanted to be an architect. I really did. And if there's so many different reasons behind it, but the main reason was I enjoyed drawing. So it's actually really fun to see my youngest son right now just absolutely loves to draw. And I tell him, you don't have to be an architect necessarily just because that's the thing that people refer to. You don't have to be a cartoonist. You don't have to be the couple of things that people know. overall. It can be so much more than that. But that's really what I wanted to do. And that's really where it started. Architect, as it turns out, is not one of the things that I ended up doing for many, many different reasons. I discovered there's more to being an architect than just being able to draw well.
As someone who cannot draw, I already have an immediate appreciation for you in that. I have troubles with stick figures, so that's all good in that. So let's fill in the gaps a little bit here. You have this desire to be an architect. You're going through school. Tell us a little bit more about what your later education careers were like, and what was that first job for you?
Well, I will say that in between architect and the first role, I really struggled to figure out what it was that I wanted to do occupationally, because you and I both know that, from the point in time where you become 7 or 8 years old, everybody inundates you with the question of, what are you going to be when you grow up? What will you be? And so I will say that it is partially my personal mission to eradicate that question and replace it with much more useful questions, because first of all, it doesn't really make sense, because our occupation is certainly not who we are. And we find very, very unhealthy ways to identify ourselves if we are solely identified by our occupation. Now, all that said, I really, really struggled with that. And I placed a lot of emphasis on that, even through college. I changed majors 9 times. And then my very, very first quote unquote professional job, it was a regional manager type role for a franchise company. And all my friends and family told me I was so lucky to have this opportunity straight out of college, straight out of university. And it was because I was going to be supervising nearly 20 people. They told me that if I did really well, I would have a BMW in the first year and they would pay for that. Awesome. Sounds great. Right. And, it was going to pay pretty decent too. So I didn't have any other alternatives whatsoever. I didn't have like tons and tons of offers. And honestly, I really didn't know what I wanted to be or do. So I took that because everybody was telling me that I should. And I moved my brand new bride down to Portland, Oregon, and we started our life together. I took this role, and it was mediocre at best. Have you ever had I know you spent a good portion of your career in education. You ever had a chunk of time where it felt very, very undelightfully mediocre?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I had a mentor who had shared with me at this one place where I worked. He said, a third of the time that you work here is going to be fantastic and phenomenal. And another third of the time, it's going to absolutely suck. And the other third of the time, it's going to be mediocre. So when it's mediocre, just kind of realize that it's going to change at some point, but it's okay to ride out the mediocrity.
So I only got 2 of those thirds in this role. I only got the suck part and the mediocre part. And the reason was, I know this now, I didn't know this at the time, was because so many things were a polar opposite fit from both who I am, what my strengths are, what I really wanted or thought that I wanted at the time. And that started from day one almost immediately grating on me. And it got to the point where it became really unhealthy. It went from mediocre to where I remember that I was finding excuses to go out to eat. I was basically self-medicating with all kinds of food. So I would frequent all the restaurants right around my office. I gained almost 50 pounds. It became pretty bad, to put it mildly. And to the point where I started having panic attacks, actually, driving into work. And I kind of thought I was going crazy a little bit because I didn't know what a panic attack was at the time, but it was pretty bad. And I remember how there was one kind of moment in there where I was on I-5, and I was actually on the interchange from I-84 to I-5. If you've ever been to the Portland area, there's a lot of traffic in there during rush hour times. And we were dead stop. And I'm looking around the cars side to side, and I'm kind of a little bit irritated because somebody is walking faster than all our cars sitting here. And I'm just like watching them, gripping the wheel, watching it. But I look side to side, and I'm looking at these people, and they don't look very happy either. And I'm like, is this what it's like to is this what it's like to do work? Because I don't like it very much. So, I'm looking at all these people, and I sort of have this moment where it's like something has to change. I don't know what, I don't know how, but I can't keep doing this. I can't keep freaking out in my car, on the highway. Yeah. And, I'm like, I don't know if I just can't hack it in the real world or what is going on, but I really honestly felt like that at the time. So I decided that I was going to go and talk to my boss. I didn't know what else to do. So I'm like, well, I can't hide this. I need to go talk to my boss. So my boss made some time for me. We chatted for about an hour, and he was even before remote work was popular, I actually worked in a different satellite office. So we were on the phone. He listened, asked a lot of questions, and it felt really, really good to sort of get this off my chest and say, hey, I think I maybe made a mistake. And this was probably about a year and a half into the role. And he asked all those questions, and we went away, decided, hey, maybe we need to do a couple of different things. Let's revisit together here in a few weeks. So he calls all my team together and comes down to my office. And 3 weeks later, I'm like, okay, great. Well, we're going to do this training, and I'm going to be able to finally figure out how we can change the role or whatever. It didn't go that way at all. Turns out he fired me. So huge surprise. I would not wish that on anyone whatsoever. Standing up in front of the room, he basically gave me an option, by the way, hey, you can have 3 months severance if you come up here and we talk about how to transition and everything else. And you pass it on the baton in front of your team, or you can walk out the door, tail between your legs, and get 2 weeks pay. So I needed the money really bad. I didn't have a lot in savings at the time. And I went ahead and took the severance. I don't remember what happened. I'm sure I was bright red the entire time. It was horribly embarrassing. And I remember thinking on the way home, my next thoughts that I actually remember after that was on the way home. I was driving home in the Portland rain. I remember thinking oh crap, I moved my wife down here away from her family, and I don't even have a job to show for it. And then my next thought was I can't ever do this again. This is crazy. I don't know if other people live like this, but I can't do it. So that, well, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. It became this wonderful gift because it became the motivator for me to figure out how on earth can I do this differently? How on earth can I, figure out what great can look like? Because there's some people in the world, I knew that at this point, there are some people in the world that love their work. How do I find those people and figure out what they're doing? And how do I do it differently for myself? So the next 10 years became moving from what I would call dream job for myself to the next. And when something would change and I decided I wanted something different, I would make another career change. So that's the, believe it or not, that's the quick version.
One of the things that is most compelling about your story is that it hits so many highs and lows for many mid-career professionals who have had to pivot in some way, shape, or form. And one of the things specifically that you talked about, and obviously it's tied so much into the work with your company, It Happened to Your Career, and your podcast, is about fit.
Yes.
What would you suggest to somebody who is listening to our conversation today about how they can be doing a better job at assessing their fit for their career so they can do the work that makes them the most happy and they have the greatest impact?
I think to answer that question fully, you have to understand what stops people from fit first. And one of the biggest things that stops us from finding a wonderful fit is we as humans have a tendency, this is just part of the way that our brain works. And it's wonderful in some ways. However, when we're talking about career fit, it works against us. We have a tendency to think that one thing is the solution. If I had a terrible boss, then I might think, well, I just need to find a better boss and that'll take care of the problem. Sure. Or if I and really needing more flexibility. I think, well, okay, if I can just find a job that has more flexibility, that's going to take care of the problem. And that doesn't work very well. That's our predisposition to try and figure out, like, well, what is the one or two things that is really going to solve this problem? But fit is actually a complex problem, meaning there's many, many variables. And when you have complex problems, then no one thing is the solution ever, ever, ever. And you and I both know that, but it's hard to think about it. So what we came up with, and I've actually changed and modified this over the last 10 years as the science and research has become more clear. And as we have now, 10 years worth of data working with someplace between 2,000 and 3,000 people in finding their own fit. But we now have basically what we call 7 keys to fulfillment. And you can think about that as just how do we divide up and kind of chunk out fit? So I'll kind of rattle off those really quickly so that you can get an idea of the full scope of things that create fit. And these are things like contribution. Contribution meaning how well does your work support your desire to help others and make an impact? And specifically, how does that fit with the ways that you are best able to contribute? And then things like flexibility and autonomy. This one's fascinating. We don't need to get too deep into it, but it's so impactful when people don't have it's particularly the autonomy part and a say or feeling like they have a say or influence in how the work is done. So that's the autonomy part. The flexibility you can think about is how much freedom do you have in how you work? Quality of life, and does your work support other areas of your life? If it doesn't, then you might have a wonderful job, but if it's not supporting the other things that you really care about in other areas of your life, then eventually it's going to become a bad deal for you. So growth, we have this human need for growth in so many different ways, but you can think about growth, not just an advancement type growth. That's the way we have a tendency to talk about it, but also think about it as how much your work offers the potential for learning, creativity, and even getting the right type of feedback and inputs. Signature strengths, which I didn't come up with that term. Really, really smart guy by the name of Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology, came up with that term, him and one other person. However, I think that he got many things very, very right based on all the research that I've seen up to this day. And then you think about signature strengths as how well your work takes advantage of your talents, your predispositions, and even your built and innate abilities. So that's 5 out of the 7. The last 2 are supportive people. We talk a lot about, you hear a lot about in the media and blog posts and podcasts and things like that, like supportive bosses, but it's not just that. It is how supported you are by the people around you. And do you have some of the, it's become a buzzword over the last about 8 years or so, but do you have the space or the psychological safety with those people, with that group of people? And then values, like if your work is going against what you value the most, like it's never going to be a fit. So the challenge, to answer your question, is finding the right combination of those things, not finding any one of those. So when I say fit, I'm talking about those as a whole. And we often will tell people, how do we create a profile of your ideal career? And that's what we mean. How do we find some of the areas and what you need in each of those keys to fulfillment or areas as a whole? Does that make any kind of sense?
Absolutely. And I like how you encompass this very short 3-letter word and really broke it down and defined it in various considerations for somebody who is either struggling at a certain point in their career or they are looking to make this kind of change. And it brings me to this next question.
Yeah.
Last year, around this time, we started getting data from the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics about people leaving their jobs, and it got coined as the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
And over this past year, we have had people redefine that in very different ways. I have heard things like the great employment reevaluation, just to name one in specifically. And I actually like entertaining these different ideas about what this actually is. I'm curious, though, from your standpoint, what do you think have been some of the advantages and disadvantages of this employment reawakening that has happened as a result of the pandemic?
Well, I think one of the huge advantages is that from a societal perspective, it has forced many organizations to reevaluate how they are treating their people and what great looks like for their people, their teams, the people that are, supporting that organization. So I think that's been a wonderful, huge advantage. I've had this conversation many times over the years. I thought that was slowly coming anyways. And you can probably find podcasts out there where, I've talked to other people about like that coming and that being a general trend. I think it was really escalated over the last couple of years. So I'm actually quite thankful for that. I think that that's something that's very needed anyways. And that's the trend, or has been the trend. I do think that another huge advantage is it has escalated. Anytime we get into any kind of recession or bounce around, I know that, we had the initial dip and scare and everything that came along with that for so many organizations. And it was really a huge time of unrest. And I don't want to make light of it at all. When COVID initially came about and started hitting most of the world in 2020, I think the wonderful thing about both then and now is when you get into those dips, it creates new opportunities for people, because you have some organizations that are dying, for lack of a better phrase, like they're not going to make it. And well, I feel for them. I've owned multiple businesses and been a part of a lot of organizations over the years. I definitely feel for them. Also, it creates openness to doing things in new and different ways. And for individuals, I find that these are the best times out of any, to be able to do crazy things like you wouldn't be able to do as easily in other times, like getting organizations to be able to create a custom role for you, getting organizations to be able to be open to talking to you about what your personal fit might be. It takes to, it's not just something where you show up and you're like, you need to cater to me. That's not what I'm talking about. But instead, being able to have a dialogue and a partnership to create what's good for the individual as well as the whole organization. I found a much higher degree of openness now and in past recessionary or dip times compared to normal average time. So I think that's a huge advantage, huge opportunity. There are some disadvantages, I suppose, but I don't know, for fun's sake and maybe selfishly, I like to focus on the advantages.
Sure. And certainly we're seeing a lot right now about it's an employee's market, and there, to your point, there's a lot more opportunities and things like that.
Yeah.
One of the things that my podcast has specifically focused on is helping people tell their story from a place of value and service. So when you're networking or you're interviewing, how do you communicate specifically how you're going to help somebody, as evident by your expertise or your talents? That being said, you and I both know that we can look on LinkedIn or we can look on social media, or if anybody out there happens to be using ProFinder, for example, that candidates or job seekers think that fluff is a lot better. If I get to be a little more vague or a little bit more broad, and I start talking about things like, I want to make a difference, or anything like that, that's what's going to attract. And from our view, we know that typically doesn't work because it's not specific enough. How do you help the people you work with tell a much clearer and cleaner story about their value in the workplace?
Well, I think you hit on the number one thing. And I would say that getting very, very specific is the key to so many different things, ranging from, we talk about that I was just talking about that with my leadership team at Happen to Your Career, where we were talking about like, hey, how do you help your team Well, you force them to get very, very specific by asking wonderful questions. But, outside of the leadership space and into the career change space, it is also the key to so many, many different, many different problems. And the question becomes like, how do you get to the point where you can be so specific? Because yes, we all have this human need to want to make a difference. If we don't, we feel apathetic or dejected or feel like we're in a current, ongoing state of blah, was how one of our clients said. Like, I just feel like I've been in an ongoing state of blah for the last 9 months. And like, I need to do something about that. If you don't have that, things are not great or mediocre. We get back to that 1/3 mediocre that you're talking about earlier. Let me throw out a simple piece of logic that I live by that helps our clients, and may be helpful to many of the listeners here. If I don't know what I want, if I don't know specifically the best ways that I can contribute, we talked about contribution being one of those major areas of fit, it is going to be very difficult to articulate that to other people. And if I don't know what I want, it's going to be very difficult to ask for what I want or get what I want. Like nearly impossible most of the time. And secondarily, if I don't know specifically how I contribute the best and the ways that light me up, because when we talk about contribution, it's partially about contextually, how do you feel like you are making an impact? How do you feel like you are making a contribution? And I'll give you one quick story about that. There was this place I used to work when I was doing HR leadership back in the day. And the company owned a lot of processing plants and things like that. It was a food organization. Well, went into one of the plants, and one of the operators, the machine operators, he was a gravy machine operator. Like, of all things, he would operated the gravy machine to produce all the gravy for this. It was like a fast food type thing. So it sounds a little bit crazy, right? But the reason I'm bringing it up is you talk to most of the people in that factory, in that plant, and they'd say, well, we make food. Like, when you ask them, what do you do? And you ask him, he's like, I feed families. Like, that's what I do. Like, well, what do you mean you feed families? Well, like, if this gravy is not up to par, if I am, not able to show up, if we can't produce this, then that means that families are missing this time together when they eat, for people who need a quick meal to be able to do it. And he looked at it totally, totally different. So I throw that out there only to just offer a quick example of, how do you feel connected to your work in the way that you contribute? Because you could argue every single role in the world is really contributing to others, to make an impact. Like, it is in some way. It doesn't matter whether you are an executive VP of whatever organization, or whether you are working one-on-one with people. Like, every job is. The trick is understanding how you feel connected to it, and understand what makes you feel like you're making an impact. So that's all contextual. Okay, so here's one super quick nugget of a way that you can do that. We have this quick exercise that we have, not all of our clients, but some of our clients do. We call it the 1-page strengths exercise. And although we're talking about strengths at the moment, it helps you identify some of those places where you feel like you contribute more. So you can literally grab a blank piece of paper. On the left side, I want you to write all your past roles, all your past opportunities. They can be volunteer, they can be paid, they can be whatever. And then on the right side, I want you to write, what in that role do you feel like there's two things here. Number one, do you feel like you were great at, or at least better than others? And then the number two thing I want you to write for each role is, where did you feel like you were making an impact? Now, the great thing about having it on one page, and the great thing about having, basically your history of all different areas that you may have had roles in, you can start to see some of the patterns. So it's not going to give you the magic bullet or anything like that. But what it'll do is give you some clues as to where you feel a higher level of contribution compared to others. Okay. So now we've gone three different places, right? Let's bring it all the way back to to the end.
Sounds good.
If you don't understand those pieces, you're going to have a hard time selling it in an interview. So that's why I started with, thing number one and thing number two. Like you have to understand how you contribute to be able to articulate how you contribute. But if you go into an interview and you're able to say, or put on your resume, you're able to say, hey, one of the things that I am really very excited about is being able to, look forward to the future, notice different patterns, and particularly in the health space, because I, have faced health challenges myself. And it's something that I feel I can help other people avoid for the future. That is a lot more specific than I want to make an impact, right?
Absolutely. I really appreciate you walking us through that exercise and helping us define. We can talk all day long about, say, you need to be more specific, but you gave us such a great example to help people be a little bit more specific about what they're doing and what they want in their career. So thank you for that. Scott, I have really enjoyed our time today, but as we start wrapping up, the one question I always end with is, what advice would you give someone who is listening to help them build their mid-career GPS so they can figure out whatever's next?
Well, I so love that. I don't think I've told you this, but I love that you have GPS built into what you're doing here, because Thank you. Really look at, absolutely. I mean, and also I believe very strongly that that GPS or that North Star type mentality, understanding what you need, what you want, how you can contribute, all of those pieces that we've talked about here for the last 20, 30 minutes, it helps create the path forward to where you want to go and helps influence that path forward. So I would encourage you to become very, very clear on what you want, for the reasons of, so you can ask what you want and actually find it in the real world, but also very clear on how you can best show up in the world, whether it's through contribution, whether it is your strengths, whether it's your talents, whether it's how your past experiences relate to what you need in the future. So without that, you're unlikely to find that fit. So get very, very clear on what you want. And, one of the best ways that we have to get started on that is that exercise we just talked about. That's a pretty easy place to start. But if you want a more comprehensive way, we have what we call this 8-day email mini course. We call it the Figure It Out mini course, where you can go and and each day you get a couple of questions every day via email to get started on clarifying what it is that you want, what it is that you need. And you can actually go to figureitout.co, that's figureitout.co, and just put in your email and it'll send you those questions. And that would be one easy way to be able to get started on what it is that you want and getting clear.
I love that. Absolutely. So Scott, I want to thank you for spending some time with us. Before we wrap up, though, I would like you to just take a moment and share with all the listeners how people can find you, connect with you, and learn more about you and your services.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Happen to Your Career, HAPPEN, happen to your career, as opposed to, your career happening to you. But happentoyourcareer.com is our home base. And we also have a podcast of the same name. It's been running for approaching 10 years now. I believe we are also still the most listened to career change podcast in the entire world, unless something has changed very recently. I've been off work for the last month, actually. My team has been doing a wonderful job of taking care of things. We just got back from Greece. But all that to say that happentoyourcareer.com and the Happen to Your Career podcast are the best way to connect with all of the resources that we have, even that 8-day mini course that I talked about. And we have a book coming out October 11th. So that's not available now, but it will be also available in the near future. And, connecting with the podcast will help keep you informed on when things and resources like that come out so that you can make your own career change.
Scott, I will make sure that all of that is in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today on the Mid-Career GPS podcast. Hey, hold on. Stay with me for another minute. What is your biggest takeaway from my conversation with Scott Anthony Barlow? Career changes don't have to be overwhelming and time-consuming. In fact, they can be easy. If you'd like to learn more about how I can help you build your mid-career GPS to whatever is next, you can email me at john@johnnarrell.com or message me on LinkedIn. And I'd love to have you join my email community. To easily do that, check the show notes and click on the links, or go to my website and download my free career transition guide called the 55-Minute Career Transition Jumpstart at johnnarrell.com/free. And until next time, my friends, remember this: you'll build your mid-career GPS 1 mile or 1 step at a time, and how you show up matters. Make it a great rest of your day.